Period dramas are a bit of a passion for me to watch. They always have been, ever since I was a little kid binging the 1995 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. That's what originally drew me to Bridgerton. It was marketed as a Netflix ensemble period piece with a decent budget. Sign me up! You don't see enough of those types of things if you ask me. A lot of the really big period dramas, from what I often see, hone in on one specific character or romantic relationship, and that's what pulls almost the entirety of the focus. Yes, you still get the character development and the story progression from the other characters, but it's always framed from the perspective of the lead. Take, for instance, Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth Bennet's your lead character, and that doesn't really change. The majority of the events that take place are framed with her opinions and perspective in mind, and so whilst her sisters and extended acquaintances do undergo their own arcs, it is through the lens of Elizabeth's own. Here with Bridgerton, I was kind of hoping for something that was more all-encompassing, that whilst at its core would retain that main romantic pairing each season, would also veer off and explore the arcs and storylines of the various different characters within the show in a more complete way. Not just filtering things through the perspective of Daphne or Simon, who are the pairing of the first season. And that's what we got. In terms of the writing for an ensemble piece about a family and an interconnected social group, Season 1 hit it out of the park in the most significant way. This is the season where it felt like everybody had a storyline of substance that would link back into the storylines of various other characters. You of course have Simon and Daphne as the main romance, but also have Daphne being courted by Prince What's-His-Face at the behest of the Queen, who in turn has become very fond of her and named her the Diamond of the Season. In competition for the hand of the Princess Cressida Cowper, who's also antagonistic towards Penelope, who in turn is moonlighting as Lady Whistledown and is in a cold war with the Queen due to her very harsh turn of phrase in her newsletter. Penelope's best friend is Eloise, who gets caught up in the hunt for Whistledown, whilst the more general Featherington subplot brings in even more characters and ties them all together. Lord Featherington's broken. He's trying to make his money back before his debtors can get him by partaking in a fixed match he organises with Mr. Mondrich, who in turn wants to open a club with his share of the winnings and who is also a friend of Simon. Simon's mother figure is Lady Danbury, who gets mixed up in everybody's business but is especially involved in the Simon romance storyline and also in the general goings-on with the Queen. She's also good friends with Violet, who's the matriarch of the Bridgerton family. Her eldest son, the current Lord Bridgerton, is Anthony, and his whole story arc is pretty much just him crashing out 24/7 about his role in the family and the weight of responsibility. He's friends with Simon, but has no intention of actually letting Daphne marry this man because he considers him a rake in the same vein as himself. He's constantly clashing with his mother, and is regularly fumbling his relationship with his current mistress Sienna. Benedict, the second brother, has a passion for art, and that's probably the most distant and self-contained storyline of them all, with the fewest links back to the main story. Back to the Featheringtons, a cousin, Marina, comes to stay, and she's pregnant from some random dude that went and got himself blown up in the Napoleonic Wars. And since she doesn't want to marry his brother to cover up the scandal, she goes and tries to hoodwink Colin into marrying her and thinking they're his kids instead, which causes her to clash with Penelope, who's in love with Colin, and so also causes her to fall into the crosshairs of Lady Whistledown. That's just a very brief snapshot of what's going on in terms of the plot, but I think what really made it great was that you'd have these other characters that were not necessarily involved in the storyline the whole way, make important cameos every so often just to make the world feel ever so slightly more alive. Whether it's through family chats and discussions during the day, or even a little swing out the back at night, or through more dramatic scenes. For instance, Anthony challenges Simon to a duel for the honour of his sister, whom he accuses Simon of having defiled. He brings Benedict, who hasn't really been involved in that storyline at all, to serve as his second. And why does he do that? Because he's his brother and he trusts him to be there for him. Then Daphne comes in riding on a horse with Colin. Colin, who also hasn't really been involved in this storyline at all. And why is he with her? Because he's her brother and she trusts him. It just makes the family feel like an actual family when they have some realistic crossover moments. Another one that fits this vibe is when Colin's telling Anthony that he intends to marry Marina, and Anthony essentially yells at him and calls him a dumb virgin. Anthony hadn't been involved in this story up to now, and yet they bother to include such a scene because it fleshes out the characters and the dynamics at play. I'd say that Season 1's probably the show's peak at feeling quite so interconnected in this way. Don't get me wrong, the vibe still continues to exist, but I think at times during the course of Season 2 and quite a lot during Season 3, instead of feeling quite so interconnected, the narrative starts to feel like it's separated into major blocks. Characters will interact with each other to a point, but the plot lines feel very much more streamlined into different lanes, as opposed to the crazy tangled web that Season 1 felt like. You know, that's probably due to the fact that Season 1 had to take that time to ensure you knew who was who and showcase the character dynamics, but like I said, that's what I was hoping for. And I do think that Season 3 especially felt different in that regard. It felt a lot more shut off. There would be linking characters, of course, but there was just this overall shift. The family dynamic started to fade away, and at the same time, the world started to feel like it had less depth, I suppose. Instead of feeling like a living, breathing society, it became more of a backdrop for all the characters to exist in. It's still enjoyable, just not in the same way as it used to be. So I think that's one thing that's changed about the show that I really miss. I think the best part of ensemble shows is that tangled web of family dynamics and storylines that interweave throughout. It helps tie everything together in a neat little bow. And obviously everybody's going to have their own storyline going on, but that connection of being able to dip in and dip out really enhances it. It's like in Game of Thrones when they acknowledge events and news from other parts of the kingdom and the world that formed other storylines in the show. It made everything come to life. It helped with your immersion. However, that's not the only change in the ensemble vibe that I'm missing out on as each season passes. No. There's a far more significant divergence I'm starting to notice as we get further and further along in the show and the story. After every single season, we seem to be seeing the main protagonists get their asses shuffled off to the side and their stories just abruptly end. And it throws off the whole vibe. It is very narratively unsatisfying. Think of the majority of ensemble type shows. Just because a major character finishes one arc doesn't mean their story just ends forever. You don't see those popular characters suddenly become an afterthought to the story, but here, that's what they do. Now granted, for the first example, I would say it wasn't as much of a writing issue more than it was just one of those things. The actor for Simon had only signed on for one season, and there were a bunch of other circumstances at play that meant he was never going to come back for season 2. I'm not going to hate on the actor because shit happens. But judging by the way Anthony's storyline played out, there's a good chance he would have been a glorified window dressing anyway. But yes, for Simon, it was strange that he never came back, and it kind of damaged the show's narrative. When he's introduced, he's apparently such a key figure. He's amongst Anthony's best friends in the entire world. He integrates into the family, and he and Daphne end up having a son. Season 2 rolls around, and where is he? Who knows? Do they ever actually mention it? Do they ever say his name again? Dude is Anthony's best pal, and he can't make the trip from the country to attend his boy's wedding? Either of them? His wife and son casually go off to London and to her childhood home, and he doesn't see them for weeks to months at a time. Dude was neglected and abandoned by his dad for years, and yet we're supposed to think he'd be like this. It feels like a gaping hole in the narrative, made even worse by the fact that they brought Daphne back. She gets some of those family scenes that, like I said earlier, help make the world come alive, but in this instance, it draws attention to the elephant in the room and just seems awkward on the screen. By season 3, they clearly had nothing for her, and so she was off to bigger and better things. I think. I've not watched any of her work beyond this, except for Bank of Dave. Love Bank of Dave. So that was a wrap on the Bassets, but they had a couple of things going for them that helped mask it. For starters, they did have the biggest arc across their season. They had their courtship, their will they won't they, the marriage, the honeymoon periods filled with lots of sex scenes. Then there was the whole baby drama before the happy ending. They took you on a ride and gave you a lot of story that allowed the audience to soak in the happiness. On top of that, in season 2, Anthony's storyline covered up those gaps well. It was a very stacked cast, so you could afford to farewell one of them and turn the other into a glorified cameo before sending her on her way as well. When it comes to Anthony and Kate though, things started to get more and more exposed. Let's be real, across those first 2 seasons, Anthony 100% was giving off massive main character energy. Yeah, Daphne and Simon were key players in that role, but Anthony had such a key role in that season too. Then you couple that with his role in the second season as the main romantic lead, and yeah, dude is the main character, and he gobbles up so much screen time. Obviously, when you come into season 3, you have to dial that back a bit. Colin and Penelope are going to be the principal roles, and so they got to keep building the other storylines too. Got to set up those future seasons. But hey, there is still room for Anthony. Or so we thought. What happens to our new couple? They go off on an extended honeymoon very early on, and when they come back, they're barely around before they go off to India for another extended trip. So suddenly they, much like the Bassets, go from being the main it couple to extreme obscurity over the course of a season, which is jarring and out of place. However, when we come to the Bassets vs. Bridgertons, I think it feels worse for Anthony and Kate to get shuffled off into the background because we got way less of their actual story than we did for Daphne and Simon. Like I said, we got the rise, fall, and rise for them. For Anthony and Kate, it wasn't the same. The majority of their love story was angst. You don't get nearly as much of their actual happiness, their post-wedding happiness. People want to see the couple they're invested in having a lot of happy moments. Whereas here it was angst pining a disastrously failed wedding, more angst a terrible accident, and then finally love, and then it was over. You come back and you get a couple of scenes here and there, but it's not what people wanted or expected. They wanted more significant involvement in the story from 2 of the show's most popular characters. Now obviously scheduling and whatnot played a part with Jonathan Bailey continuing to rise high in his career, but yeah, his role wasn't ideal. You go from having him be a core character with a lot of brooding depth to shift him into this outsider who has no involvement in the story really, and is a perpetually smiley puppy dog. His absence from the season is jarring because there really does seem like there'd be so many different storylines you can plug him into that would make a lot of sense, and it's the same with Kate. Look, let's be real, I do not care about the Mondrich family. Does anyone? It seems obvious to me that you could easily pivot that storyline into working for Kate and Anthony. At the end of season 2, they were somewhat social outcasts, right? They tried to host that party and pretty much nobody turned up. Thus, the idea of Kate having to step into the role of Lady Bridgerton and have to prove herself in society by holding that big party to impress the Queen, like Miss Mondridge does in the actual story, it makes a lot of sense. It feels like the perfect tale for Kate, doesn't it? Anthony would obviously need something to do as well, but there really was plenty to have him do without turning him into a character that strips all the focus away from Colin and Penelope. Maybe have him have an internal crisis when he sees that his mum is vibing with Lady Danbury's brother. Maybe have him continue with those very paternal scenes he shared with Gregory and Hyacinth. Maybe have him panic about the idea of being a father and worried about living up to the example of his own father. Those are just off the top of my head, but there could be anything else. And the sad thing is, it feels like it's going to be the same this season. I think he said he's going to be in it, but not for very long. The ensemble falls away slowly but surely. I have the same fear for Pollen too. Are they going to have much of a role? Or will Penn at best be turned into a side character that you see snarking with the Queen from time to time, but who has no real role beyond that? It just feels cheap, I suppose. Plus, every time it happens, it feels like the scope of the cast and the story gets smaller and smaller. The family dynamic shrinks away, and it all just feels off to me. I don't much like it, and I hope they find a way to correct the course with some of the future seasons. Otherwise, I think the story is eventually going to feel very threadbare. Of course, I could be wrong about all of this, as after all, these are just my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about everything we've talked about today? Are you with me? The ensemble vibes of the show are dying and need to be restored? Or do you prefer a more streamlined show? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.